2 years after Operation Broken Chains, Ibrahim Traore stood before the International Criminal Court in The Hague, no longer a dead man, but very much alive and serving as the key witness in the largest human trafficking prosecution in history. The courtroom was packed with journalists, legal observers, and family members of victims who had traveled from around the world to witness this moment of accountability. The proceedings had taken months to organize, with defendants from 12 countries, evidence in dozens of languages, and legal complexities that required the cooperation of multiple international justice systems. But the evidence that Ibrahim and his team had gathered was so comprehensive, so meticulously documented, that defense attorneys struggled to challenge its authenticity or relevance. Dr. Elisa Martin sat in the defendant's dock, her carefully maintained facade of humanitarian concern finally stripped away. The woman who had once justified trafficking as resource allocation now faced charges of crimes against humanity, conspiracy, money laundering, and corruption on an international scale. Her transformation from respected human rights leader to convicted criminal had sent shockwaves through the international community and prompted wholesale reviews of humanitarian organizations worldwide. Professor Adama Konate was also present, though she had chosen to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her testimony had revealed the sophisticated recruitment methods used to target vulnerable families, and her cooperation had led to the identification of similar recruitment networks in other countries. The evidence presented in this case, the chief prosecutor told the court, reveals not just individual criminal acts, but a systematic perversion of institutions designed to protect the most vulnerable members of our global community. The defendants didn't just traffic in human beings, they trafficked in hope, in dreams, in the fundamental trust that families place in educational and humanitarian organizations. As Ibrahim prepared to deliver his testimony, he thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. It had begun with a single suspicious report and a 12-year-old girl's desperate letter about her missing sister. Now it was ending with international justice being served and systemic changes being implemented to prevent similar conspiracies from taking root. The victim impact statements were perhaps the most powerful part of the proceedings. Halima, Fatima's sister, had recovered enough to testify about her experiences. Though her trauma was still evident, her courage in speaking publicly had inspired other survivors to come forward with their own testimonies. "They took more than just my body," she told the court, her voice steady despite the difficulty of reliving her experiences. "They took my trust in education, in opportunities, in the basic goodness of people who claim to help others. But what they couldn't take was my determination to ensure that what happened to me never happens to anyone else." Fatima, now 17 and studying journalism with the support of a legitimate scholarship program, sat in the gallery watching her sister's testimony. The reunion between the sisters had been difficult. The trauma Halima had experienced couldn't be erased by rescue, but their family was slowly healing with the support of specialized counseling services. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. Financial records showed that the trafficking network had generated over $500 million in profits over 5 years, with money flowing through dozens of shell companies and legitimate businesses. The client database recovered during the raids led to additional prosecutions of prominent individuals who had purchased victims, including politicians, business leaders, and other humanitarian officials. But perhaps the most damaging evidence was the communications between network leaders recorded through the surveillance devices Ibrahim had planted during his infiltration of trafficking facilities. These conversations revealed not just the scope of the criminal enterprise, but the callous indifference with which the defendants had discussed the systematic destruction of innocent lives. When Ibrahim finally took the stand, his testimony lasted for 3 days. He methodically walked the court through his investigation, from the initial suspicious report through his dangerous infiltration of trafficking facilities. His hidden camera footage from the Marseille facility was shown to the court, causing several observers to leave the room in distress. The most difficult part of this investigation, Ibrahim told the court, wasn't the personal danger or the physical hardships. It was maintaining hope in the face of such systematic evil. But I learned that hope isn't just an emotion, it's a choice. Every day I chose to believe that justice was possible, that these victims could be saved, that this conspiracy could be exposed. The defense attorneys attempted to discredit Ibrahim's methods, arguing that his infiltration involved deception and potentially illegal surveillance. But the judges ruled that his actions were justified by the extraordinary circumstances and the failure of traditional law enforcement to address the conspiracy. Mr. Traore's investigation, the chief judge noted, was conducted with remarkable restraint and professionalism under circumstances that would have challenged even trained law enforcement officers. His evidence has been corroborated by multiple independent sources and represents the highest standards of investigative journalism. The sentences, when they were finally announced, reflected the international scope and severity of the crimes. Dr. Elisa Martin received life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, while Professor Konaté's cooperation earned her a 20-year sentence with eligibility for parole after 15 years. Dozens of other conspirators received sentences ranging from 10 to 30 years. But the legal proceedings were only part of the story. The exposure of the trafficking network had prompted fundamental reforms in how international humanitarian organizations operated. New oversight mechanisms, independent auditing requirements, and victim protection protocols had been implemented across the sector. Educational exchange programs now required multiple levels of verification, family contact requirements, and transparent reporting systems that made it virtually impossible for similar networks to operate under humanitarian cover. The reforms weren't perfect, but they represented a significant improvement in protecting vulnerable populations from exploitation. 2 weeks after his harrowing infiltration of the Marseille facility, Ibrahim found himself in an environment that seemed to represent everything good about international cooperation and human rights advocacy. The headquarters of the International Human Rights Organization in Geneva stood as a testament to humanity's highest aspirations, gleaming marble staircases that seemed to ascend toward justice itself, towering glass walls that suggested transparency and openness, and corridors lined with photographs of human faces from every continent, each representing lives that had been touched by the organization's work. The building buzzed with the energy of dedicated professionals working to make the world a better place. Staff members from dozens of countries moved through the halls with purposeful strides, their conversations filled with discussions of policy initiatives, refugee assistance programs, and advocacy campaigns. Banners hung from the ceiling proclaiming commitments to human dignity, gender equality, and the protection of vulnerable populations. Ibrahim's steps echoed in the vast lobby as he made his way to the executive floors. His manner was cautious but confident. He had spent the past 2 weeks carefully documenting his evidence, preparing his presentation, and building a case that he believed could bring down the entire trafficking network. The weight of the evidence in his briefcase felt both heavy and hopeful. Surely, when presented to the right people, this information would trigger the kind of international response that could save hundreds of lives. The receptionist, a polished young woman who spoke 5 languages fluently, guided him through security checkpoints and up to the executive level. Here, the already impressive building became even more magnificent. Original artwork from around the world adorned the walls, representing the organization's global reach and cultural sensitivity. Conference rooms bore the names of famous human rights activists, and meeting spaces were designed to facilitate the kind of high-level discussions that shaped international policy. After passing through several checkpoints and waiting areas, Ibrahim was finally escorted to the office of Dr. Elisa Martin, the organization's Director of Global Anti-Trafficking Initiatives. Her office occupied a corner of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered breathtaking views of Lake Geneva and the Alps beyond. The space was decorated with awards, commendations, and photographs that documented a career dedicated to fighting injustice around the world. Dr. Martin herself was exactly what one would expect from a leader in the human rights field. She was a woman in her early 50s with silver blonde hair styled in a professional but approachable manner, and deep blue eyes that seemed to convey both compassion and steely determination. Her desk was covered with reports from field offices around the world, and her bookshelves contained the definitive works on human trafficking, international law, and social justice. "Mr. Traore," she said, rising from her chair and extending her hand with a warm smile that seemed to radiate genuine concern and admiration, "your reputation precedes you. The courage you've shown in investigating this network is truly commendable. Please sit down and tell me everything." Ibrahim settled into a leather chair that probably cost more than most people in his country earned in a year, but the luxury felt appropriate for an organization that operated on a global scale. He opened his briefcase and began laying out the evidence he had gathered: photographs, audio recordings, financial documents, and testimonies that painted a comprehensive picture of the trafficking operation. "Dr. Martin, what I've uncovered goes far beyond what we initially suspected. This isn't just a regional problem or even a continental issue. This is a sophisticated international network that has infiltrated legitimate organizations, government agencies, and educational institutions across multiple countries." Dr. Martin leaned forward, her expression one of intense concentration and growing concern. She examined each piece of evidence carefully, asking detailed questions about sources, verification methods, and the chain of custody for the materials. Her professionalism was impressive. This was clearly someone who understood the importance of building airtight cases that could withstand legal scrutiny. "The scope of this operation is staggering," she said, holding up a photograph of the Marseille facility. "The level of sophistication, the resources required. This represents years of planning and millions of dollars in investment. We're not dealing with opportunistic criminals. This is organized crime operating at the highest levels." They spent over an hour reviewing the evidence, with Dr. Martin taking detailed notes and asking increasingly specific questions about the network's operations. She seemed particularly interested in the financial aspects, the money trails, the funding sources, and the economic infrastructure that supported such a massive undertaking. "Ibrahim," she said finally, closing the folder containing his evidence and leaning back in her chair, "I want you to know that people like you are exactly why our organization exists. You've risked everything to expose a truth that the world needs to hear. You represent the very best of human courage and moral conviction." Ibrahim felt a surge of relief and validation. Finally, he had found the right person to help him bring this nightmare to light. "Dr. Martin, I know your organization has the reach and resources to coordinate an international response. With your help, we can save these girls and prevent countless others from suffering the same fate." For a moment, Dr. Martin was quiet, studying Ibrahim with an expression that seemed to shift subtly. The compassionate concern remained, but there was something else now, a calculating quality that made Ibrahim slightly uncomfortable. "Tell me, Ibrahim," she said slowly, "what do you think drives demand for these services? What creates the market that makes operations like this profitable? The question seemed oddly theoretical for someone who should be focused on immediate action. I suppose it's the combination of poverty creating vulnerable populations and wealth creating demand for exploitation, Ibrahim replied carefully. Dr. Martin nodded thoughtfully. Exactly. And have you considered that perhaps, there are those who would argue that this system, however distasteful, serves certain economic and social functions, that it provides opportunities for advancement that wouldn't otherwise exist? Ibrahim stared at her, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Dr. Martin, these are children, young women who were promised education and instead found themselves enslaved. There's no economic theory that can justify what I witnessed. Dr. Martin's smile never wavered, but it began to transform, from warm and compassionate to something colder, more predatory. Ibrahim, you've uncovered something that you think is a criminal conspiracy. But what if I told you that what you've seen is actually part of a carefully managed system that serves the greater good? The room seemed to grow smaller, the beautiful views outside the window becoming irrelevant, as Ibrahim realized he was trapped in a conversation that was taking a horrifying turn. What are you saying? Dr. Martin stood and walked to her window, gazing out at the peaceful lake that had witnessed centuries of international diplomacy and cooperation. When she spoke, her voice carried a tone of patient instruction, as if she were explaining a complex concept to a student who is struggling to understand. These girls, Ibrahim, they come from situations of grinding poverty, with no realistic prospects for advancement, education, or meaningful lives. The system you've discovered takes them from those circumstances and places them in situations where they have value, where they contribute to economic activity, where they serve purposes that generate wealth and opportunity. Ibrahim rose from his chair, his mind reeling as the implications became clear. You're talking about slavery. You're justifying human trafficking. I'm talking about resource allocation, Dr. Martin replied calmly, turning back to face him. About market efficiency. About providing services for which there is genuine demand. The moral framework you're applying is, provincial, limited. It fails to account for the larger economic and social dynamics at play. The evidence Ibrahim had brought, photographs of drugged teenagers, audio recordings of their systematic abuse, financial documents showing the profits generated by their exploitation, lay spread across Dr. Martin's desk like an accusation. But she looked at it all with the detached interest of someone reviewing quarterly performance reports. You're part of this? Ibrahim said, the words coming out as barely more than a whisper. I'm not part of it, Ibrahim. I am it. Her voice carried a pride that made his skin crawl. This organization, these offices, this entire humanitarian facade, it exists to provide cover for the most efficient human resource management system ever created. We don't just traffic in bodies, we traffic in hope, in dreams, in the very aspirations that make these girls valuable commodities. Ibrahim felt the room spinning around him. Everything he had believed about justice, about international cooperation, about the fundamental goodness of organizations dedicated to human rights, it was all crashing down around him. The girls you think you're saving, they're provided with opportunities their villages could never offer. They travel internationally, they experience sophisticated urban environments, they contribute to economic activities that generate substantial wealth. Yes, the terms of their participation are restrictive. But that's simply the nature of efficient resource allocation. This is rape, Ibrahim said, his voice growing stronger with rage. This is torture. This is the systematic destruction of innocent lives. It's supply and demand, Dr. Martin replied, with the patience of someone explaining basic economics. We never force the world to see anything it doesn't want to see. We simply provide choices, opportunities, and services for which there is genuine market demand. The humanitarian rhetoric, the appeals to moral outrage, those are marketing tools, Ibrahim, ways of maintaining public support for organizations like this one. She gestured around her office with its awards and commendations and photographs with world leaders. Do you think all of this exists to fight trafficking? It exists because trafficking needs a cover story. It needs legitimacy. It needs access to government officials, international airports, and financial systems. Ibrahim slowly backed toward the door, his mind racing as he tried to process the magnitude of what he was learning. This wasn't just a criminal conspiracy, it was a fundamental corruption of the very institutions that were supposed to protect the vulnerable. And now you've challenged us, Dr. Martin said, her voice carrying a tone of mild disappointment. You've forced us to reveal ourselves to you, which creates complications. You understand that we can't just simply allow you to leave here and continue your investigation. You can't stop me, Ibrahim said, reaching for the door handle. I have backup, people who know where I am, evidence that's already been distributed. Ibrahim, Dr. Martin said, with a smile that contained no warmth whatsoever, who do you think provides funding for investigative journalism in this region? Who do you think controls the communication networks you've been using to transmit your evidence? Who do you think has been monitoring every move you've made since you first started asking questions about missing girls? The door behind Ibrahim opened, and 2 security officers entered. But these weren't the private guards he might have expected. These were professionals who moved with military precision and carried equipment that suggested law enforcement or intelligence backgrounds. The beautiful thing about operating at this level is that we don't need to threaten or intimidate. We simply redirect. Your investigation has been very valuable to us, actually. It's helped us identify security vulnerabilities and communication gaps that we can now address. Ibrahim realized that every piece of evidence he thought he had been secretly gathering had actually been monitored and controlled. His infiltration of the Marseille facility, his recordings of Professor Konate, even his communication with his backup team, it had all been allowed to happen because it served their purposes. What happens now? He asked, his voice barely steady. Dr. Martin returned to her desk and began organizing the evidence he had brought. Now, Ibrahim, you become part of the story. Another dedicated investigator who disappeared while pursuing a dangerous lead. Another tragic reminder of the risks faced by those who try to fight international crime. The security officers moved closer, and Ibrahim realized that his war against trafficking was about to end before it truly had begun. But even as despair threatened to overwhelm him, a small part of his mind was already working on alternatives, backup plans, and ways to ensure that the truth would survive even if he didn't. Hidden behind the curtains of darkness lay a global conspiracy that devoured the lives of young girls under the guise of education, modeling, and human rights. This was a story that had been buried in files, forgotten in bureaucratic silence, until Ibrahim Traore lifted the veil through a confidential report that had mysteriously appeared on his desk one rain-soaked morning in October. The report itself was unremarkable, a single manila folder with a government seal, containing photocopied documents and testimonies that painted a picture so horrific it seemed like fiction. From the factories of Paris to the streets of Ouagadougou, where an NGO worker reported the disappearance of 50 girls over a 6-month period, Ibrahim embarked on a relentless quest to uncover the truth the world was desperately trying to hide. Each page he turned revealed new horrors: medical records showing evidence of drugging, financial transactions in currencies that traced back to shell companies, and most damning of all, scholarship applications signed by girls whose families later reported them missing. The pattern was meticulous, systematic, and utterly ruthless. Ibrahim's investigation led him to Professor Adama Konate, a respected academic at the University of Ouagadougou. On the surface, she was everything a professor should be: published author, human rights advocate, and beloved mentor to young women seeking educational opportunities abroad. But beneath this veneer lay something far more sinister. The university professor who sent girls to Europe under scholarship programs turned out to be a crucial link in this sinister network. He spent days observing her routine, noting the pattern of young women who visited her office with hope in their eyes, only to disappear weeks later. He approached her disguised as a graduate student researching gender studies, but hidden in his sleeve was a sophisticated recording device that would capture conversations destined to shake the foundations of what people believed about humanitarian aid. Their first meeting was cordial, even encouraging. Professor Konate spoke eloquently about empowering African women through education, her office walls lined with certificates of appreciation from various international organizations. But as Ibrahim pressed deeper, asking specific questions about the selection criteria and follow-up procedures, he noticed subtle changes in her demeanor: quick glances toward the door, fingers drumming nervously on her desk, and most tellingly, the way she avoided direct answers about the girl's current status. A letter from the hands of a 12-year-old girl led him deep into the network's labyrinthine operations. The child, Fatima, had approached him at a local market, her small frame trembling with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. Her sister Halima had been selected for a prestigious scholarship to study in France, a dream come true for a family struggling to make ends meet. But 6 months had passed without a single phone call, letter, or any indication that Halima was even alive. The night had grown deep, with gentle drizzle continuing outside the safe house where Ibrahim had arranged to meet his French contact. Water droplets slowly slid down the window panes like tears, each one carrying the weight of untold stories. The room was dimly lit by an old bulb hanging from the ceiling, its yellow light casting trembling shadows on the walls that seemed to dance with the ghosts of the missing girls. Confidential files lay scattered across the table, their edges seemingly dampened by the moisture in the air. Each document told a piece of the story: visa applications, medical records, bank transfers, and most heartbreaking of all, the hopeful letters these girls had written to their families before departing for what they believed would be a better life. Ibrahim Traore sat in his chair, his weathered hands clasped tightly together, his gaze fixed on the French woman sitting across from him. Margot Dubois was a former NGO worker whose conscience had finally overcome her fear. She was slowly extracting documents from her leather briefcase with movements that were deliberate, cautious, as if each paper held secrets that could change everything or get them both killed. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken understanding. Both knew that this conversation would mark a point of no return. Once these secrets were revealed, there would be no going back to the comfortable ignorance that had allowed this horror to flourish. When did all this begin? Ibrahim's voice carried the depth that one feels in the silence before a storm, each word measured and weighted with the gravity of their situation. Margot held her breath for a moment, her pale hands trembling slightly as she opened a particular file. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, as if saying the words too loudly might summon the very demons they were discussing. 5 months ago, our NGO in Paris became suspicious that African girls were being taken away under the pretense of scholarships. At first, we thought it was just administrative oversight. You know how these international programs can be disorganized? But the real purpose wasn't education. It was something far more sinister. We started asking questions, following paper trails, and what we found— Her voice trailed off as she stared at the rain-streaked window. What purpose? Ibrahim leaned forward slightly, the lines on his forehead deepening with concern and barely contained rage. He had seen enough corruption in his years as an investigative journalist, but something about the woman's tone suggested this was beyond anything he had encountered. Margot opened a specific page in her file, revealing photographs of young girls in school uniforms, their faces bright with hope and excitement. But Ibrahim could see something else in their eyes now, a vulnerability that made his stomach turn. Their smiles were genuine, trusting, completely unaware of the trap that awaited them. These girls were invited to France on educational scholarships, full funding, prestigious universities, even living allowances. Their families threw celebrations, entire villages came together to wish them well. But there's no record of them after their arrival at Charles de Gaulle Airport, no enrollment at any college, no presence in any hostel or dormitory, no digital footprint whatsoever. She pulled out another set of documents: police reports, missing person filings, desperate letters from families. We suspect they've all been absorbed by an international network involved in human trafficking. But this isn't street-level trafficking, Ibrahim. This is sophisticated, well-funded, and reaches into the highest levels of international organizations. Ibrahim studied the photographs intently, memorizing each face, each name, each shattered dream. One image caught his attention: a girl who couldn't have been more than 16, wearing a traditional African dress and holding what appeared to be a letter of acceptance. Her smile was radiant, her eyes filled with dreams of a future that would never come. "This looks like she's from the northern region of Burkina Faso," he observed, his voice thick with emotion.
"Yes, Aminata Sawadogo. She's also from Ouagadougou," Margot nodded gravely. "And we believe this conspiracy not only touches your city, but may have originated from there. The selection process, the documentation, the initial contact, it all traces back to academic institutions in West Africa." The atmosphere in the room grew heavy with silence as the implications sank in. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the tin roof with increasing urgency, while inside, Ibrahim's mind raced through the connections, the patterns, the horrifying scope of what they were uncovering. "This isn't just about 50 girls," Ibrahim said slowly, his voice filled with a pain that came from deep within his soul. "These are our daughters, our sisters, our future. This is an attack on the very essence of our community, our values, our honor." Margot closed the file and placed it gently on the table between them. The gesture seemed to carry the weight of all the evidence, all the testimonies, all the broken dreams contained within those pages. "I've told you everything I know, Ibrahim. I've risked my career, my safety, my life to bring this to you. Now it's up to you what you do with this information. But remember, this network isn't limited to Paris anymore. Our investigation suggests it's deep, extensive, and extremely dangerous. They have connections in government, law enforcement, and international organizations." Ibrahim rose from his chair, picked up the file, and looked at the photographs once more in the yellow light. Each face seemed to plead with him, to demand justice, to require him to act regardless of the personal cost. "If this is war, then I will fight. But I won't fight alone. Every father, every mother, every brother and sister deserves to know the truth." At that moment, the curtains began to flutter in the wind from a window that had been slightly ajar, and the bulb flickered momentarily, as if the night itself had shuddered at this revelation. The shadows on the wall seemed to shift and dance like the spirits of the missing girls calling out for justice. The University of Ouagadougou campus buzzed with its usual afternoon energy, students hurrying between classes, vendors selling snacks and cold drinks, and the constant hum of intellectual discourse that filled the courtyard. But Ibrahim felt none of this vibrancy as he made his way toward the Humanities building. His mind was focused on the meeting ahead, on the performance he would need to deliver flawlessly. In the corner of the air-conditioned office stood a large wooden desk positioned strategically against the wall, behind which sat Professor Adama Conte. She was a woman in her late 40s, her face bearing the refined smile that came from years of academic prestige and social standing. Her eyes gleamed with what appeared to be genuine compassion and moral authority, and her tone carried the soft authority that wrapped truth in layers of scholarly discourse and humanitarian rhetoric. The office itself was a testament to her reputation. Shelves lined with books on gender studies and human rights, framed photographs of her with various international dignitaries, and certificates from organizations across Europe and Africa. A casual observer would see exactly what they were meant to see: a champion of women's education and empowerment. Ibrahim knocked gently on the partially open door and entered upon receiving permission. He had spent hours preparing his appearance, dressed as an ordinary graduate student in a crisp white shirt and khaki pants, carrying a worn leather satchel that suggested serious academic intent. But beneath his shirt button lay concealed a sophisticated recording device, its memory card capable of storing hours of conversation in crystal-clear quality. "Assalamu alaikum, Professor Konate," he said respectfully, bowing his head slightly in the traditional greeting. "Walaikum assalam, my dear boy. Please sit down," she replied warmly, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "I understand you're Ibrahim, yes? And you're interested in social research, particularly regarding women's educational opportunities." Ibrahim settled into the chair, arranging his features into what he hoped was an expression of eager academic curiosity. "Yes, Professor. I'm working on my thesis about educational migration patterns from West Africa to Europe. I've heard remarkable things about your scholarship program, how you've managed to send so many deserving young women to prestigious European universities." Professor Konate lifted her teacup to her lips, delicate china, with an intricate pattern that spoke of refined taste and international connections. She took a slow sip, before placing it carefully on its saucer. When she spoke, her words carried layers of meaning that made Ibrahim's skin crawl. "Ah, yes. We weave dreams here, Ibrahim. Beautiful, transformative dreams. But you must understand, sometimes dreams are bought at prices that seem cheap initially, but require substantial payments later. We only work with girls who possess the art of learning, not just academic learning, but life learning." "What kind of learning is necessary?" Ibrahim leaned forward slightly, his voice carrying just the right mixture of scholarly interest and naive curiosity. The professor's smile never wavered, but something shifted in her eyes, a calculation, a measuring. "Not necessary, Ibrahim, but certain qualities must be present. The ability to endure challenges, to remain silent when discretion is required, to adapt to new environments and expectations. The outside world, you see, shows no mercy to those who are unprepared for its realities." There was gentleness in her tone, but the hidden implications beneath her carefully chosen words made every nerve in Ibrahim's body alert. This was not the language of education. This was the vocabulary of exploitation wrapped in academic respectability. "What kind of assignments are given to these young women? Is the selection process purely based on academic merit?" Ibrahim emphasized the word assignments slightly, watching for any reaction. The professor's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly before her smile returned, wider than before. "Some qualities, my dear Ibrahim, are not measured through examination marks or grade point averages. They are read through eyes, through bearing, through a certain flexibility of spirit. We only choose those who possess the natural capacity to understand that opportunities come with obligations." The room felt smaller now, the air thicker. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, but he pressed on. "And if someone were to refuse these obligations?" For the first time, the professor's smile dimmed noticeably. Her fingers drummed silently on the desk, and when she spoke, her voice carried a subtle threat wrapped in academic discourse. In the narrow, winding alleys of the old quarter, where ancient mud-brick buildings stood shoulder to shoulder with more modern structures, life continued its eternal dance. Children played soccer with a ball made of rags and plastic bags, their laughter mixing with the calls of vendors closing their stalls for the day. The air was thick with the scent of grilled meat, burning charcoal, and the distinctive red dust that seemed to coat everything in this part of the world. Ibrahim had chosen this location carefully, a small tea stall tucked between a fabric shop and a motorcycle repair garage, far from the university campus and the watchful eyes that might recognize him. The elderly proprietor, Mamadou, had known Ibrahim for years and could be trusted to provide both good tea and discretion. Sitting at a small wooden table under a faded umbrella, Ibrahim spread his field notes before him, sipping sweet mint tea from a small glass while reviewing the recordings from his meeting with Professor Konate. The device had captured everything perfectly, but he knew that audio alone wouldn't be enough. He needed more evidence, more connections, more proof of the systematic nature of this operation. At that moment, as if summoned by his thoughts, a small figure approached from the shadows between the buildings. She was thin and frail, wrapped in a faded pink dress that had clearly been mended multiple times. The girl appeared to be barely 12 years old, her small hands clutching a folded piece of paper against her chest, as if it contained her most precious possession. Her eyes, large and expressive in her delicate face, were slightly red with worry and unshed tears. When she spoke, her voice trembled with the mixture of fear and desperate hope that Ibrahim had learned to recognize in the families of the disappeared. "Excuse me, sir," she said in the local language, Moor, her words barely audible above the evening sounds of the neighborhood. "Are you the journalist? The one who writes about missing people?" Ibrahim looked up from his notes, immediately struck by the courage it must have taken for this child to approach a stranger. "Yes, little sister, I am Ibrahim Tarore. What is your name?" The girl extended her hand, offering him the carefully folded paper with the reverence of someone presenting a sacred relic. "I am Fatima Oderaugo. This is about my sister, Halima. She went away on a scholarship and never came back. My mother says she must be studying hard in the big city, but we haven't heard her voice in so many months." Ibrahim gently took the paper and unfolded it with the care it deserved. Inside, written in the careful handwriting of someone with limited formal education, was a brief letter that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "To whoever can help, my sister, Halima Oderaugo, went to Europe to study at a university. She was so happy, so proud. She promised to call us every week and send money home. But it has been 6 months and we have heard nothing. I secretly wrote down her last phone number when she was talking to someone before she left. Maybe you can use it to find her. Maybe you can bring her home. I will pray for you every day if you try." Below the letter, written in faded ink, was a mobile number with a French country code. Ibrahim stared at the paper for a long moment, then looked slowly at Fatima. In her young face he saw the pain of every family that had been touched by this evil, the desperate hope of those who refuse to believe that their loved ones are truly gone. "Tell me about Halima," he said gently, folding the letter carefully and placing it in his wallet. "What kind of person was she?" Fatima's face lit up with the memory, her sadness temporarily replaced by the joy of remembering her sister. "She was the smartest girl in our village. She could read French and English, and she always helped other children with their schoolwork. When the scholarship letter came, she danced around our compound for hours. She said she would study hard, become a doctor or teacher, and bring honor to our family." Her expression darkened again. "She promised to take us all to France someday. She said we would live in a beautiful house, eat good food every day, and I would go to school with real books and uniforms. But she left and never came back." Moisture appeared in Ibrahim's eyes as he watched this child carry a burden that should never fall on such young shoulders. The weight of her sister's disappearance, the family's financial struggles, the slowly dying hope, it was all there in her 12-year-old face.
Then, their visa applications automatically encounter complications, administrative delays, bureaucratic obstacles. The world, Ibrahim, doesn't give everyone opportunities, only to a select few who understand the true nature of advancement. Those who waste their chances, who prove ungrateful for the doors that are opened for them, they remain trapped forever in the dust of these provincial classrooms. A moment of profound silence filled the room. Outside, Ibrahim could hear the distant laughter of students echoing across the university courtyard, their voices carrying the innocent joy of young people pursuing their dreams. But inside this office, a cold, calculated evil held court behind a facade of academic respectability. "Thank you, Professor. This has been most enlightening," Ibrahim said quietly, rising from his chair with movements that he hoped appeared casual rather than urgent.
Professor Konate took another delicate sip of her tea, her eyes never leaving Ibrahim's face. "Excellent, Ibrahim. I know you might be chosen soon for one of our special programs. I see that quality of silent understanding in you, that willingness to see beyond conventional morality to the larger picture." Ibrahim opened the door, his hand trembling slightly on the handle. He glanced back once and saw that Professor Konate had already returned to her paperwork, as if nothing unusual had transpired. The device hidden beneath his shirt had captured every word, every nuance, every damning revelation. As he walked across the campus courtyard, Ibrahim felt the weight of what he had just uncovered. This wasn't just one corrupt professor. This was a sophisticated recruitment system operating under the cover of academic prestige and humanitarian mission. And Professor Konate's casual confidence suggested that she believed herself completely protected, untouchable. The war, Ibrahim realized, had indeed just begun. The call to Maghrib prayer echoed across Ouagadougou as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and orange. It was that magical hour when the heat of the day finally began to subside and the city's rhythm shifted from the urgency of commerce to the gentler pace of evening reflection.
"Fatima, you are very brave to come to me with this. This letter is very valuable. It might be the key to finding not just Halima, but many other girls who have disappeared. You've shared something that could save lives." A slight gleam appeared in Fatima's eyes, as if someone had lit a small lamp in the darkness of her despair. "Will she come back?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ibrahim lowered his head, struggling with the weight of false hope versus honest uncertainty. When he finally spoke, his voice carried both truth and compassion. "I don't make promises that I can't keep, Fatima, but I will certainly try with everything I have. And if something terrible has happened to Halima, I will make sure those responsible are brought to justice." Fatima looked into Ibrahim's eyes for a long moment, searching for something, reassurance perhaps, or simply the confirmation that someone finally cared about her sister's fate. Finding what she needed, she nodded slightly and began to turn away. "Wait," Ibrahim called softly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out some money, not much, but enough for a week's meals, "for your family. And Fatima, if you ever need to reach me, ask for me at the newspaper office. The receptionist, Aminata, she will know how to find me." The girl accepted the money with the dignity of someone much older, tucked it carefully into her dress pocket, and disappeared into the gathering darkness between the buildings. Ibrahim watched her retreating figure until she was swallowed by the shadows, her small form carrying a burden that would fuel his determination for the weeks to come. He took out his phone and dialed the French number from Halima's letter. After several rings, an automated voice answered, but instead of a normal voicemail message, he heard a series of coded instructions in French, followed by options for different services. The implications made his blood run cold. Ibrahim's fist clenched involuntarily around his phone. This was no longer just an investigation. It had become his personal war against an evil that preyed on the dreams and hopes of innocent families like Fatima's. 3 days later, Ibrahim found himself in the sterile environment of a processing center on the outskirts of Ouagadougou. The building was modern and professional, with the kind of clean, efficient appearance that inspired confidence in worried parents sending their daughters far from home. Glass panels reflected the morning sun, creating an almost ethereal glow that seemed to promise bright futures and limitless possibilities. The waiting room was eerily quiet despite being filled with young women. The walls were painted a reassuring shade of pale blue, and neat rows of comfortable chairs were arranged throughout the space. Despite the air-conditioned coolness, an unmistakable tension hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Over the intercom system, a soft voice occasionally called candidates by number rather than name, a small detail that should have been a warning to anyone paying attention. Ibrahim, now present under the carefully constructed false identity of Aminata Diarra, wore a simple hijab and modest dress that covered the sophisticated surveillance equipment hidden beneath. His transformation had been painstaking: makeup to soften his features, padding to create a feminine silhouette, and hours of practice to perfect a convincing feminine voice and mannerisms. The preparation had taken weeks, with help from a theater director who specialized in gender transformation for stage performances. Hidden within the folds of his headscarf was a tiny wireless camera no larger than a button, continuously recording everything while transmitting to a secure server operated by his contacts at an international human rights organization. In his purse was a GPS tracking device, ensuring that his location could be monitored at all times by his backup team, which included both local journalists and international investigators. The other young women in the room told a heartbreaking story through their body language. Some stared at the floor, their hands clasped tightly in their laps, overwhelmed by the magnitude of leaving home for the first time. Others gazed absent-mindedly at motivational posters on the walls, images of smiling African women in graduation caps standing in front of European universities with names like Sorbonne, Oxford, and Cambridge emblazoned beneath. One girl, who couldn't have been more than 17, clutched a worn photograph of her family. Her lips moved silently as she appeared to be praying, seeking divine protection for the journey ahead. Another repeatedly checked a small notebook containing what appeared to be phrases in French and English, preparing for a life in a foreign country where she would need every advantage possible. Most of these girls probably traveled for hours to reach this place, some walking for days from remote villages carrying letters of recommendation from village elders, academic transcripts carefully preserved in plastic folders, and the pooled savings of extended families who had sacrificed everything to give one daughter this chance at a better life. Their clothing told stories of careful preparation, new dresses bought specially for this occasion, shoes polished until they gleamed, and hair braided in elaborate patterns that represented the hopes and prayers of entire communities. Aminata Diarra, a woman in a crisp white medical coat, appeared in the doorway, consulting a clipboard with practiced efficiency. Her appearance was immaculate: perfectly styled hair, expensive jewelry that seemed out of place in what was supposedly a charitable organization, and manicured nails that had never known manual labor.
The woman, who introduced herself only as Dr. Sarah, gestured for Ibrahim to sit while she reviewed his fabricated application. Her movements were practiced and mechanical, as if she had conducted the same interview hundreds of times before. When she spoke, her accent revealed French origins, but her manner suggested someone who had spent considerable time in various African countries. "Please place your index finger here," she instructed, indicating the fingerprint scanner. The device hummed to life with a blue light that seemed ominous rather than welcoming. Ibrahim hesitated for just a moment. Once his biometric data was in their system, there would be no going back.
This single action would mark him as either a brilliant investigator or a foolish journalist who had walked into a trap from which there might be no escape. But he extended his right hand and placed his finger on the scanner. As soon as contact was made, the hidden recording device activated, not only documenting the biometric data collection, but also transmitting his exact location to his backup team. "Have you been fully briefed about this scholarship opportunity?" Dr. Sarah asked, her eyes never leaving her computer screen as data flowed across multiple windows. Ibrahim caught glimpses of what appeared to be financial transactions and shipping manifests, hardly the kind of information one would expect in an educational facility. "Yes, ma'am, I understand I'll have the chance to study in Europe." Ibrahim deliberately adopted the tone of an eager but naive village girl. "My family has dreamed of this opportunity for years. We've saved every franc we could." The woman's smile was practiced and empty, the kind of expression that politicians wear when making promises they have no intention of keeping. "This scholarship is quite exclusive, Aminata. We only select girls who possess certain qualities: physical resilience, emotional flexibility, and above all, the ability to adapt to new situations without asking too many questions. The European environment can be quite different from what you're accustomed to. Do you understand what I mean?" Every word was a red flag, but Ibrahim nodded with feigned innocence. "Yes, ma'am, I'm ready to learn whatever is necessary. My grandmother always said that education requires sacrifice." The woman leaned back in her chair, studying Ibrahim with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. "Tell me, Aminata, what would you do if you found yourself in a situation that was uncomfortable? If the people helping you asked you to do things that weren't exactly what you expected?" The question hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. Ibrahim felt his pulse quicken, but he maintained his naive facade. "I suppose I would trust that they know what's best for me. After all, they have experience with European society that I lack." "Exactly the attitude we look for," Dr. Sarah said, making notes on his file. "Now, one final question. Do you have any medical conditions? Any family members who might cause complications if they became concerned about your welfare?" Ibrahim shook his head, playing the role of an isolated, vulnerable target. "No, ma'am, I'm healthy, and my family trusts that this opportunity is the best thing for our future." Dr. Sarah closed his file with a satisfied expression. "Excellent. You'll receive notification about the next phase by tomorrow evening. If selected, transportation will be arranged immediately. Pack light. Everything you need will be provided in your new location. And remember, discretion is essential. Some people don't understand the nature of international education programs." Ibrahim gathered his purse and thanked her profusely before leaving the office, maintaining his character until he was completely out of sight. As he returned to the waiting room, his eyes fell on the genuine candidates still waiting, girls whose only crime was dreaming of education and a better life. Their trust and hope made his chest tighten with rage at the systematic evil that was about to consume them. One young woman caught his attention, barely 16, wearing a dress that had clearly been sewn by hand for this special occasion. She held the lever of recommendation from her village chief, and her eyes sparkled with the kind of pure hope that made Ibrahim's heart ache. In a few hours, she might be processed through this same system, her fingerprints scanned, her vulnerabilities assessed, her fate sealed by people who saw her nothing more than a commodity. Walking out into the afternoon heat, Ibrahim checked his phone. The GPS signal had been successfully transmitted, and his backup team now had the exact coordinates of the processing center. But more importantly, he was now inside their system, tagged and tracked as potential merchandise. The real test would come next, maintaining his cover while gathering the evidence needed to bring down this entire network before any more innocent girls disappeared into its web. 24 hours later, Ibrahim received the message he had both expected and dreaded. A simple text to his assumed identity. "Congratulations, Aminata. Transportation arranged for tonight. Be ready at 10 p.m. Bring only essential items." By nightfall, Ibrahim found himself at a remote airstrip on the outskirts of the city. The location was deliberately isolated. No commercial traffic, no witnesses, no oversight from aviation authorities. A single runway stretched into the darkness, illuminated only by portable lights that cast eerie shadows across the cracked asphalt. It was here, in the cargo terminal behind a cluster of abandoned buildings, that the true horror of the operation became clear. A small private cargo plane stood bathed in harsh floodlights, but behind it, in the layers of shadows, lay a silence as deadly as death itself. The aircraft bore no identifying marks, no registration numbers, no indication of its origin or destination. A battered truck slowly approached the cargo area and stopped, its engine dying with a mechanical wheeze that seemed to echo across the empty landscape. Several masked individuals emerged from the darkness and began silently unloading wooden boxes labeled "Medical Aid, Destination Europe." The labels were professionally printed, complete with official-looking stamps and shipping manifests that would pass casual inspection. Ibrahim, following the predetermined plan his backup team had developed, had already hidden inside an empty medical supply box. The container was larger than the others, designed to hold bulky equipment rather than the human cargo that filled the smaller crates. He kept his body compressed tightly, his breathing controlled through a technique learned from military contacts, with the wireless device strapped to his chest, continuously transmitting data to servers in 3 different countries. From the boxes beside him came sounds that would haunt his dreams for years to come. The faint, labored breathing of semi-conscious girls, along with the lingering smell of medical drugs that were slowly suppressing their nervous systems. The chemical odor was sweet and cloying, designed to keep victims compliant but conscious enough to follow basic instructions. "How many in tonight's shipment?" a man with a heavy accent asked, approaching the truck. His voice carried the casual indifference of someone discussing livestock rather than human beings. 15 new ones, another voice replied with a laugh that contained no humor. "One was making too much noise during processing, so we had to give her a slightly higher dose. She should be manageable by the time we reach the destination." Ibrahim's hands were drenched in sweat as he tried to keep his nerves under control. Every instinct screamed at him to break cover, to fight, to do something to stop this immediate horror. But he knew that premature action would only save a few victims while allowing the larger network to escape and relocate. Suddenly, footsteps approached, and a security guard wearing a uniform marked Airport Authority appeared. His flashlight swept across the cargo area, and Ibrahim held his breath as the beam passed inches from his hiding place. "What's the nature of this shipment?" the guard asked with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. The masked man quickly stepped forward, producing a folder of documents. "Emergency medical supplies for refugee camps in Eastern Europe. The paperwork is all in order. You can verify with the sponsoring organization." The guard examined the documents with the thoroughness of someone who took his job seriously. Ibrahim could hear papers rustling, the scratch of a pen as signatures were verified, the beep of a handheld device scanning barcodes. This manifest shows medical equipment, but these boxes seem unusually heavy for their size, the guard observed, his suspicion evident in his tone. Abraham's heart began pounding so violently he was certain it would be audible through the thin walls of his container. He pressed himself against the bottom of the box, making himself as small and motionless as possible. "This one definitely seems to be moving," the guard said, leaning closer. "Are you certain there's no livestock in these containers?" "Absolutely certain, sir. If there's any movement, it's probably from hydraulic pressure changes. These containers are sealed for transport, and sometimes the pressure equalization creates minor shifts in the contents." The guard remained skeptical, placing his ear against Ibrahim's container as if trying to detect any sound from within. The moment stretched into eternity, with Ibrahim's world reduced to the sound of his own carefully controlled breathing and the thundering of his heart. Suddenly, a radio crackled to life on the guard's belt. "Unit 7, report to Terminal A immediately. We have a situation requiring your attention." The guard straightened, his attention diverted by the call. He looked once more at the containers, then at the masked men waiting patiently for his decision. "All right, everything appears to be in order, but I want these containers loaded immediately and this aircraft departed within the hour. I don't want any delays or complications." The masked man bowed respectfully. "Of course, sir. We appreciate your diligence in maintaining security." As the guard's footsteps faded into the distance, Ibrahim took the first full breath he had managed in several minutes. But his relief was short-lived, as the containers were now being loaded into the aircraft's cargo hold with mechanical efficiency. The sound of metal scraping against metal filled the air as each container was positioned using hydraulic lifts and rolling conveyor systems. Ibrahim felt his box being lifted, rotated, and finally secured in place with a series of jolts and clangs that reverberated through his improvised hiding place. Around him, he could sense the presence of the other containers, those carrying the drugged girls whose only crime had been dreaming of education and a better life. The faint sounds of breathing, occasionally punctuated by soft moans or whimpers, created a symphony of human suffering that would be burned into his memory forever. The aircraft's engines roared to life, filling the cargo hold with vibrations and noise that made communication impossible. As the plane began to taxi toward the runway, Ibrahim realized that he was now committed to a journey that would either expose one of the world's most sophisticated trafficking networks or result in his own disappearance into the same system that had consumed so many innocent victims. The takeoff was rough, and Ibrahim felt his container shift and settle as the aircraft climbed into the night sky. Through the wireless device still transmitting from his chest, his backup team would be tracking the flight path, coordinating with international authorities, and preparing for whatever horrors awaited at the destination. But for now, Ibrahim was alone in the darkness, surrounded by the evidence of humanity's capacity for evil, carrying the hopes of families like Fatima's, who still believed their daughters were safely pursuing education in foreign universities. The weight of that responsibility was almost unbearable, but it was also the source of his determination to see this mission through to its conclusion, no matter the cost. 1 year later, Ibrahim Tarore stood before the newly established International Task Force on Human Trafficking, housed in a modern facility that had once been the headquarters of the very organization that Dr. Elisa Martin had used to coordinate her global network. The irony was not lost on him. Justice had literally taken over the house of evil. The intervening months had been a whirlwind of trials, testimony, and systematic dismantling of trafficking networks across 3 continents.
The evidence Ibrahim had gathered had led to prosecutions in 12 countries, the rescue of over 400 victims, and the exposure of corruption that reached into the highest levels of international organizations. Fatima's sister Halima had been among the survivors, though her recovery would take years of therapy and support. The reunion between the sisters had been both heartbreaking and beautiful. Tears of joy mixed with the painful reality of trauma that might never fully heal. But perhaps the most significant outcome was the transformation of how international scholarship programs operated. New protocols required independent verification, family contact requirements, and transparent reporting systems that made it nearly impossible for similar networks to operate under humanitarian cover. The fight against human trafficking, Ibrahim told the assembled delegates, is not won through raids and arrests alone. It is won by creating systems that protect the vulnerable, by refusing to look away from uncomfortable truths, and by recognizing that behind every statistic is a human being whose life has infinite value. As he concluded his remarks, Ibrahim's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Fatima, now 15 and attending school with the support of a legitimate scholarship program. "Mr. Ibrahim, I got accepted to university. I want to study journalism like you to help other families find their missing daughters. Thank you for keeping your promise." For Ibrahim Tarore, that message was worth more than any award or recognition. It represented hope, the unshakable belief that light could triumph over darkness, that truth could overcome deception, and that one person's courage could indeed change the world. The war against trafficking would continue, fought by new generations of investigators, activists, and ordinary citizens who refused to accept that evil could operate with impunity. And somewhere in Ouagadougou, a young girl was studying journalism, preparing to carry forward the fight for justice that had saved her sister's life. The story of Ibrahim Tarore serves as a reminder that sometimes the most powerful weapon against organized evil is one person's unwavering commitment to truth, no matter how dangerous the journey or how powerful the enemies. In a world where the vulnerable are often voiceless, it takes extraordinary courage to become their voice, and even greater courage to ensure that voice creates lasting change.